We're going to take a very brief look at two cycles that we find very useful at the Living Room. The first is the cycle of addiction, and the other is a version of the cycle of change called the revolving door model. So starting with the cycle of addiction. The entry point to addiction is any kind of emotional pain, whatever it might be, leading to a craving for relief. And an obvious source of relief is substance use or compulsive behaviour. What normally follows from those after the initial high are negative consequences from using whatever it might be. And then from the negative consequences, a sense of guilt and shame, a form of emotional pain, leading to craving for relief, more using, more negative consequences. So you can see this is the original downward spiral. What makes this interesting is we have an entry point, which is emotional pain, but the exit point potentially is guilt and shame. The guilt and shame either drives the whole cycle round again, or it can be the point where people say to themselves, "This isn't me, I'm better than this, I need to stop." Sometimes it's health consequences that lead to exiting from the cycle of addiction, but more often it's a sense of people just feeling that they're letting themselves down or people around them down. We often see people when their children are growing up or becoming a grandparent, just taking a really good look at themselves or hitting a milestone age like 30 or 40. So that sense of guilt and shame of I'm not living out my values, I'm not being the person that I know myself to be, we find is very often the point at which people can start to exit the cycle. And obviously in a therapeutic setting, we want to make sure that we're not relieving people's sense of guilt and shame, but helping them to look at those things and manage them so they can use them as a motivating force without being too overwhelmed. So that's a very brief look at the cycle of addiction. And now we're going to take a very brief look at the cycle of change. Here's a version of it that I really like called the revolving door model, developed, I believe, to help people stop smoking, to stop nicotine. We start bottom right, and the idea is that in dealing with an addiction, it's like going through a door from one side to another, from pre-contemplation before you think you've got a problem to obsession-free living. But being addiction and being pretty sneaky, you'll find that you'll have to go through around the door a few times before you come out the other side for most people. An average of 3 times for smoking at least, apparently. So pre-contemplation is before we even think we've got a problem. It's before we contemplate or think anything's wrong. And sometimes still in addiction treatment, we talk about people as pre-contemplators if they're not actually ready to make a change. Something happens. So the first little arrow at the bottom right, something occurs that makes people think, I need to do something or I need to get help. And so they move to contemplating or thinking, what can I do or what help can I get? The longer I've looked at this model, I think what help can I get is much more useful than what can I do. So this is the point where they come up with a plan. The plan might be, if it was smoking, I'm going to give up next Friday. And so having come up with a plan, put it into action. So let's say this person does give up smoking on the Friday, and then Saturday, Sunday, Monday manages to maintain it and keep up the not smoking, and then bumps into a friend who's smoking, and then the person says, oh, go on, I'll have one. And they relapse. And then a period of time passes, longer or shorter, until they actually decide that they want to come up with an adjusted plan and do something again. So it might be, okay, I'm going to stay away from my smoking friends. That's the plan in contemplation. Put it into action, keep it up, and let's say they go on holiday and relapse. thinking, well, I'll just have a few cigarettes while I'm away, and then go back to the contemplation. So the reason I really like this plan is the relapse is the most important point. That's the bit where you get the information needed to adjust your plan. So let's spare the person another relapse. Let's say their plan is, I'm going to not go on holiday, I'm going to stay away from my smoking friends, and I'm actually going to get some support for not smoking through my GP surgery. So they put that plan into action, keep it up, and fingers crossed move into obsession-free living. It's also useful because when one is in maintenance, there's only two ways to go. Either moving forwards away from the addiction or sliding back to relapse. So one can identify particular behaviours and triggers while you're in maintenance that would tend to lead to relapse or would tend to lead to long-term obsession-free living. You can easily see how this can apply to any form of addiction, whether it's a substance addiction or a behavioural addiction of any kind, which is why we like it so much at the Living Room.